She was 15, old enough for Rome, too young for anything else. Her name was Aurelia, daughter of Senator Publius Galerianus, born into marble, raised in silence. From the age of 7, she was taught to walk without sound, to lower her gaze, to treat her body as an offering, not a possession. Virtue, they told her, was in stillness. A good Roman girl should be like stone, unmoving, unquestioning, unseen. Her mother braided her hair each morning without speaking. Not out of tenderness, but tradition. Because Aurelia's life wasn't leading to adulthood, it was leading to ownership. She learned to read the 12 tables before she ever read a poem. Not for wisdom, for obedience. Her tutors drilled into her the roles of matron, of wife, of womb. Her thoughts were never asked, her will never formed. The house was beautiful, mosaic floors, ivory statues, painted gods staring from every corner. But the beauty was a mask. A palace is still a cage if the girl inside has no key. At night, she would sit beneath the courtyard vines and listen to her father's voice echo from the atrium, discussing military reforms, grain levies, foreign uprisings, but never her, not once, not even when she passed. In public, she was perfect. Draped in linen, eyes downcast, a symbol of her father's legacy. She smiled the way she was taught to, just enough to be admired, never enough to be remembered. Because in Rome, a daughter's greatest purpose was to be given away. They called it tradition, but it was closer to extinction. Her future was already signed, her silence already purchased, and the day was approaching. Not for love, not for freedom, but for the ritual. The house was filled with music, but it wasn't joyful. It was ceremonial, predictable, cold. Aurelia stood in the atrium, draped in a veil the color of fire. The flammium, a cloth older than she was, stiff with dye, stained with centuries of obedience. She had been bathed in perfumed oils, scrubbed until her skin turned raw. Not for comfort, for ritual. Her body was being prepared, polished, and painted for delivery. Not unlike a sacrifice. Outside, guests gathered, senators, matrons, priests in white. They whispered about the weather, about the banquet, not about the bride. Her silence was expected, her fear was invisible. The priest murmured the sacred words. He held sacred bread in one hand, laid olive branches at her feet. From the outside, it looked like reverence, but it was a performance. Because Rome did not marry girls, it traded them. Aurelia's mother adjusted the veil one last time, covering her face entirely. In that moment, Aurelia disappeared. A daughter was erased. A wife was presented. The groom arrived shortly after. He placed his hand on her shoulder. Not her hand, never her hand. That was for equals. This was something else. Aurelia did not speak. She was not asked to. Her voice was no longer hers. And so, in silence, the procession began. They left through the villa gates as guests cried out an ancient word, Talasio, a word older than reason, a word shouted in war, in rape, in abduction. No one knew exactly what it meant, but every Roman wedding began with it. Because every Roman wedding began as theater, a reenactment of conquest, a ritualized abduction with music instead of screams. The bride walked slowly toward a house that was not hers, surrounded by laughter that wasn't for her, and behind the veil, her breath shook, but no one looked closely enough to notice. He waited at the threshold of his domus, back straight, armor polished, mouth tight. Marcus Decimus Gallus, 32 years old, decorated twice in the Germanic campaigns, praised in the Senate for valor, known in the Forum for silence. Aurelia had seen him once before. From across the garden, he did not smile. To his peers, he was the ideal Roman man, stoic, disciplined, commanding. To Aurelia, he was a stranger twice her age, whose eyes never met hers. As she crossed into his home, her foot stepped over the ceremonial hearth, a symbolic threshold, and in Roman law, a transformation. She was no longer Aurelia, she was Galina, his wife, his property. Marcus's household stood in rows, servants, tutors, soldiers, scribes, all lined up to watch the new possession enter. She wore the red veil, he wore his military cloak. She held the wedding torch, he held a scroll, a marriage contract, signed by men, read aloud by priests, never explained to her. To Marcus, This wasn't union, it was acquisition, a way to secure lineage, political ties, a future son, a controlled body in his household to reflect his power in public. They walked together through the long corridor, paintings of battles, statues of ancestors, Aurelia's world shrinking with each step. At the end of the hall, a door waited. Behind it, a bed draped in white linen, laurel branches at the corners, a jug of wine, a locked box of jewelry she would never open. Marcus did not speak. He nodded once to the priest, once to the torchbearer, then opened the door. No one followed, because what came next was sacred, not to the gods, to the men who had written the laws. The chamber was silent, not with peace, but with law. Aurelia stood in the center, her red veil removed, her hair unpinned. Beside the bed, a single torch burned low. Its smoke curled upward like a prayer no one would answer. The room smelled of oil, wax, and crushed herbs, rituals, not comfort. She wasn't alone, but there was no one to help her. Only the gods of the hearth, carved in stone, watching with frozen eyes. Her husband entered without a word. He had waited all day, not with anticipation, but with entitlement. This was his right. The room belonged to him. The girl did too. He walked slowly, deliberately, like a man approaching a contract to be signed. She didn't flinch. She had been trained not to. He reached for her hand, not tenderly, symbolically. This was the moment the empire considered holy. A girl, a man, a bed, and silence. Outside, musicians played. Guests laughed over wine and roasted lamb. But inside this room, there were no witnesses. Only the torch, only the walls, only the gods. He took what Rome told him he could take. There were no cries, only breath, shallow, controlled. She had been told to be still. That resistance was shameful. That endurance was honor. Her body was not hers. It never had been. Afterwards, the torch was left to burn out on its own. No one entered. No one checked. Because to speak of what happened here was forbidden. Not because it was sacred, but because it was shameful. Rome did not record the screams of its brides, only their lineage. And so the night passed. The bed was remade. The blood would be examined. The girl would be praised. And no one would ever ask if she was afraid. The wedding was over, but the silence remained. Aurelia was no longer called by name. Only wife, only daughter-in-law, only vessel. The house moved around her like she wasn't there. Servants cleaned. Priests came and went. Family members brought figs and congratulations. No one asked how she felt. In the mornings, she was expected to rise, pray, prepare, not for joy, but for inspection. Was there bleeding? Was there pain? Had she conceived? Midwives whispered. The matron of the house watched her walk. Old women exchanged looks. Her worth now lived between her thighs. At meals, she sat beside a husband who barely spoke, across from elders who praised discipline in sons. Her body was discussed like livestock. Her eyes, her hips, her blood. She stopped speaking, stopped reading, stopped writing. She walked slower, felt heavier, like something inside her had collapsed without a sound. In the garden, she watched ants build tunnels and wondered if they too were told when to kneel. No one read her poems. No one cared about her thoughts. Only if she was pure, only if she obeyed. Rome praised virginity, but only as a transaction. Once married, Aurelia's silence was not a virtue. It was expected. Her value lived in what she didn't say. At 15, she moved like a statue painted with makeup. She had duties. She had rituals. She had nothing of her own. And still, the walls felt closer each day. The villa echoed with everyone's voice but hers. She bled. She prayed. She waited. And no one listened. The villa was quiet again. Days had folded into ritual. Aurelia woke, bathed, dressed. Ate only when told. Spoke only when addressed. But something inside her had not died. Not yet. In the garden, behind the statue of Juno, she found a scrap of cloth, a piece of old linen, fraying at the edges. She hid it in her sleeve, waited until twilight, when the servants were gone, when the shadows were longest. She dipped the corner into soot, pressed it against the stone, and wrote, not a letter, not a prayer, a single line, her own words, her only act of rebellion. No one would see it. No one would understand. But it was hers, her voice, hidden behind a goddess who never protected her, a message she could never say aloud. It was not much, but it was something. In a world that measured her by blood and obedience, Aurelia had left behind a truth no census could erase, a trace of herself, still speaking, still trying to be heard. It happened in the second spring. She was 16. The pregnancy had been quiet. No celebration, no garlands, just quiet nods from midwives and muttered blessings from priests. Her husband was away, inspecting farms. No letters, no concern, only orders. The labor came early. The screams were swallowed by stone walls. The child survived. Aurelia did not. The news reached the Senate in 2 lines. The child, a boy, the mother, deceased. No funeral, just a blessing. Her name recorded beside his in a ledger, then scraped away in the next revision. The portrait once painted of her in the atrium was altered, the nose sharpened, the chin made stronger, to reflect the father's lineage. Even her image was no longer hers. In Rome, legacy belonged to men. Women were vessels, their memory held only if convenient. Aurelia became a caution, not a tragedy, a wife who fulfilled her duty, a girl who died with silence intact. Her story did not pass through generations. It was not mourned in poems or carved into tombs. It was buried with her, and forgotten, almost, because somewhere behind the garden statue, the cloth remained, faded, dust-covered, but still marked, still waiting for someone to see it. Rome celebrated its victories with arches and fire. It crowned its generals. It sculpted its emperors. It preserved every law, every conquest, every name that carried power. But it erased the girls, not by mistake, by design. Aurelia was not a myth. She was not alone. She was one of thousands, sacrificed, rewritten, replaced, their faces changed to match statues, their voices buried under marble, and their suffering renamed tradition. Behind every Roman triumph was a body made quiet. Behind every golden seal, a girl forced into womanhood before she ever lived. Rome endured for centuries, but not because of its strength, because of its silence. The empire is gone now. Its gods are dust. Its palaces collapsed. But if you listen carefully beneath the broken stone, under the crushed mosaic floors, you can still hear something. A breath, a whisper, the echo of a girl who once wrote a poem and dared to hide it. She was never meant to be remembered, but you remember her now. Here's a clean and on-brand CTA for your style. She was never meant to be remembered, but you remember her now. If you believe